Hello there, friends, and welcome to day two, part two, day two, part one, however you want to frame it, of our coverage of the local elections 2025. Um, I've had an amount of sleep. I woke up slightly feeling those Jack Daniels. Not looking my best, but fortunately I have my trademark Captain Swift shades, so you'll be none the wiser of that. Don't you worry. Um, we've had a result for the Runcorn by-election, and after a full recount, Reform put on two more votes than they had before, or some votes were thrown out. I don't know, but either way, the margin ended up being Reform 6 votes ahead rather than Reform 4 votes ahead, and they have won the by-election. So history has been made in a few ways. I think that this is the closest by-election ever of any by-election that's ever been held. I think that the only closer result was possibly, I think it was a seat contested by the SNP back in, I maybe want to say 2017, the 2010s at the very least. But this is the closest by-election that's ever happened. This is also the first by-election that a Farage vehicle, shall we put it that way, has ever won afresh. UKIP did win two by-elections in the run-up to the 2015 general election, but those were both Tory defections that then stood as by-elections. This is the first time that they've just come into a standard by-election that's been held and actually won it. It was very, very tight, very, very tight. They've said the difference between like the size of a household being, the difference between who won. But despite how incredibly close it ended up being, there's a big psychological difference there between being able to say that you just held on to it if you were Labour, or if Reform comes along and they took it. They've now made up their numbers and replaced the gap in their ranks made by the departure of Rupert Lowe under slightly controversial circumstances. Mr. Cooper will be joining us shortly. Mr. Fielding appears to have popped in as well. Hello there.
Good afternoon from a very tired household here. I ended up getting to sleep about 5 o'clock in the morning. They still hadn't counted the Runcorn by-election. I was like, "Fuck this! I'm going to bed."
Oh, so how are you feeling? Well, first of all, how are you feeling? Just in general. So before we get into all the other politics, you're holding up fairly well.
It's tired, but no, I'm just catching up with the local results, and yeah, it seems to be the local results this morning seems to be carrying on from what happened last night. Reform doing well from both the Labour Party and the Conservatives. Though, for a Liberal Democrat perspective, the Liberals or the Lib Dems should be doing better once the results come in this afternoon because they're more in the seats where they're more competitive. So, yeah, it should be a bit more positive for the Lib Dems.
Well, as I found
Later
out
on today.
as I found out from you last night, surprisingly, from a Lib Dem perspective, you want to see as many votes heading Reform's way as possible. Um, in all seriousness, in all seriousness, yes. It's been sort of it's been an election of two halves very much, and today is where we are going to start seeing those areas where the Lib Dems are really going to be racking up the gains, aren't we? And continued Reform gains, no doubt. But I think we're really going to see to what degree sort of the Lib Dems and the Greens come into their own in these locals as well, and then that might allow us a broader picture finally at the end of today, where we can sort of assess just how badly Labour and the Tories have done, either relative to one another or all the rest of it. I'll take a couple of comments quickly. We have Apollo TD who says Reform winning Runcorn with a poor ground game, no real long-term voter data in a very safe Labour seat is impressive. And Kevin Logan as well says, how is the finding out portion of the Starmer McSweeney FAFO? And Frank also adds, David Beckham is 50 today. Let's see James bend it in tribute. Another variegated batch of side chat comments there. I want to just go over the results here on the right-hand side. So we have Reform's Sarah Pochin, 12,645 votes. Labour's Karen Shaw, 12,639 votes. 6 votes in it there. Reform up by 20 over 20 points. Labour down by 14 points. That's I'm doing some quick maths. What's that swing of? A swing of about 34%. Something like that. Yeah.
No, a swing of about 16%.
Oh, am I not able to just? It might be because I'm still a bit tired. I'm not adding Reform's gains and Labour's losses together. I've got to do something else to discover the swing, have I?
Yeah, and divide it. You got to divide it. Yeah.
I'll cede to you that on Mr. Fielding. I think your mind is clearer on this than mine. We also had the Tories in third place on just over 7% share of the vote, down nearly 9%. The Greens very nearly knocking the Tories into fourth there, not far off themselves. The Lib Dems in deposit loss territory there on 2.88%, and then the others. The Liberals, some Independents, Workers' Party, Rejoin EU, Monster Raving Loony, English Democrats, SDP, Volt, and the English Constitution Party. Election Maps UK says, "Yo, my slimes." I've never affectionately been called a slime before, but you know, this is an election of firsts this year, I suppose.
I'm back, Swiss. Sorry for the delay.
No worries. Welcome back, John. Me and James, we just recapped the results from the by-election. That's where we are so far.
It's kind of insane how you got someone called DMA from the private chat, Swiss, but it's kind of insane how Reform just managed to win the seat by 6 votes.
6, I know, and as well the fact that obviously because it was so tight initially, a recount was called perfectly legitimately. That's exactly what you do in that situation, and the recount yielded Reform 2 more votes.
Because originally they were leading by 4 votes. I went to sleep at about 2 in the morning and then woke up sleep disturbed at 5 in the morning. Saw on the TV Farage said he was ahead by 4 votes, and I thought, oh, Reform won that seat then. Went back to bed, woke up again 2 hours later, and then I saw that they won by 6 votes, and I thought, well, if that doesn't sum up Starmer's luck, I don't know what will.
Well, it's definitely a huge blow to Labour because that was one of the top 50 strongest seats.
It's a massive blow to them because it was their 48th safest seat. They threw the kitchen sink at this place in order to keep it. They had loads of activists, probably almost all of the activists they had left because they've got so few these days, going there. And in the end, it was all a complete failure. Yeah, it was tight, but everybody expected it to be tight, and losing your 48th safest seat is a disaster no matter how much you cut it, because what that essentially means is that 70% of your seats, if there's a by-election in any of those 70%, I have a very strong chance of flipping to an opposition party now, whether that be Reform or Tories or Lib Dems or whoever it may be. It's an extremely terrible result for Labour, given
it
that
also
all
means
they
that
threw
any
at
of the
it.
top 50 could possibly be in danger as well if a by-election happens, or maybe even a general election down the line.
They're more safe. They're safe, but they're far more in danger territory than they should comfortably be, especially given that Labour has only been in government for a year and they're already in a situation where they're losing their top 50 safest seats in by-elections. And the thing about it is, at the end of the day, is it's not like Runcorn is like a fertile ground for reform. It's not. It's the opposite, in fact. But and Reform had basically no ground game or campaign team to speak of whatsoever. They won this seat off of the back of pure public anger towards Labour and massive apathy and disillusionment towards them, which really doesn't bode well for them in the future, not only for the general election, but also for the Welsh Senedd and the Scottish Parliament and the local elections next year.
So
I would like to make, if I may just quickly, I'd like to make 2 points just on this by-election. First of all, what's said about the ability to win seats off the governing Labour Party now is absolutely right. The fact that this was considered a fairly safe seat for them, of course, it's not to guarantee that any equivalent seats with equivalent Labour leads are definitely going to fall to Reform. I think that well, I'll make my second point embedded in the first point. I was going to say that I think the fact that the previously incumbent Labour MP was someone who had been charged for having repeatedly punched a constituent in the face obviously wasn't going to play well. I think that there's going to be a slight local element of going, maybe I don't want to vote for the party that punches people again. Local colour. But also, as you were saying, the fact that this was like the 50-odd safest Labour seat and Reform were able to take it in these circumstances, it means that Labour are sitting there as basically just a big fattened up hen for the rest of the Parliament now, ready to be poached at any opportunity. Now, of course, that depends on whether things continue on the same trajectory as they presently are. But for all intents and purposes, it currently looks like it will. Which means that basically it's almost like we're back to the tail end of the Tories in power, when basically every by-election was an opportunity to deprive the Tories of yet another MP, and it became more or less nailed on that we were expecting these big swings, taking all these seats away from the Tories, and yet now so early on in Labour's time in power, perhaps we're entering the same territory with them.
People
John,
have commented.
Oh, should we let John come in? Because I think he wanted to speak just before I did.
Out of curiosity, since the Tories won this by-election, does that mean they will win it in the general election, or will it likely go back to Labour?
I mean, who knows? That's too far out to predict. It's too far out to predict exact seat outcomes at this point. We can only project like a big national picture probably at this point, but individual seats, I think it's too we're too far out from the general election to be doing that at that stage, in my opinion. As for the point I was going to make about the Senate election, well, I can't actually remember what I was going to say now.
Senate election, sorry.
Senate elections, yeah. Basically, Reform came out earlier today and said if Labour thinks they're doing badly now, wait till next year when we have the Senate elections.
Can I just go over for you guys the only, well, according to the BBC website, the only full council result that we have thus far, which is Northumberland. Here we have the Conservatives on 26, down 10. Reform on 23, up from no councillors previously. Labour on 8, down 12. Some independents, some Lib Dems, and some Greens there, but it has shifted into. Has it shifted into no overall control, or was it already no overall control?
It was Conservative.
I think it was already no overall control. It was either Conservative or it was already no overall control.
It was Conservative. If the Tories are down 10, that must mean they were on 36 previously, which puts them over the halfway mark.
Yeah. You need at least 35 for a majority on this council.
Right, I see.
In the chat here, Maoist Struggle Session Orchestrator says, get that wanker Kevin Logan in. I want to hear him cry. Well, Kevy Logs, if you're still there, let me know and I'll stick a link to join for you.
If I recall, you and Kevin Logan haven't really joined each other's channels in like ages.
It's been quite a few years. We occasionally pop up in each other's chats to say hello, but we've not streamed together in a very long time.
But I'm just curious to see how this council will be governed, because you need at least 35% of the thing, and the only way that's going to be happening is either the Conservatives and Reform work together, though that would be a bit of to negate the overall point of them of the Reform taking them out, or let's see, the Conservative Reform will need probably both Labour and those independents or at least even maybe the Lib Dems to help govern the council, and it's and those kind of like coalitions with right wing and centre left parties is not exactly viable in some places.
You're going to have to, however, whatever way you slice it, someone's going to be doing a deal with the devil if they're going to have overall control of that council in some kind of a coalition or something. Are we particularly close to hearing any other council results at the moment? I keep hearing via Apollo that Staffordshire is going quite heavily reform.
Yeah, Staffordshire is an obliteration for the Conservatives, as you can see there. 27 seats lost. There'll probably be more. I heard from Apollo TD in the chat that his Tory friend who was in Staffordshire rumoured that more or less every single seat that was up for the Conservatives was going to be taken by Reform. And it seems that is panning out exactly here. Like, this is more than likely, this council is probably going to become a Reform council, given that they really aren't that far away from actually getting an outright majority. They're only 3 away from there, and they'll probably get that. So this will go to Reform from Conservative.
Yeah. And it seems like the Conservatives will be the only opposition at the very least.
What other councils do we have a decent bulk of results in from so far? Is there anywhere else we can look at?
I don't know about Hertfordshire, but I think I've got a message.
Durham is another one I've heard that will either be declaring soon if they haven't done already.
We've got a little bit from Durham. We have 18 out of 98 seats declared, and Reform are again leading. 13 councillors for Reform, Labour on 3 down 8, a couple for the Lib Dems, and the Tories have lost all so far.
Yeah. By the way, Swiss, I've heard that verification, at least around some places in Hertfordshire, is done, and after sort of lunch break, the count will begin.
Well, that works out quite well because I'm planning to have a lunch break of my own. I wanted to sort of come back here, sort of recap the by-election result, touch base with what's happened overnight so far, and then I'm going to take maybe a couple of hours and then return a little bit later in the afternoon, and we'll sort of see this through into the evening to sort of get more or less the final results.
Okay.
The mayoralties. Did we have any more mayoralties overnight? I know that North Tyneside, obviously, Labour held on to quite slimly. I think West of England, Labour held.
Yeah,
in the
they
end,
held on to it slimly. Reform came second. Greens came third. A bit disappointing for the Greens since they were, partly what they were hoping to try and at least come first or second, I believe.
But Reform have won. Was it Lincolnshire where Andrea Jenkins ran? Yes.
Yeah, they've won that.
And Doncaster, which was a Labour hold, but the Conservatives did better than expected there, which one of the people in our group chat said would happen.
So I'll bring up the results here. So Doncaster that you've just mentioned here, Labour held it, but by a margin of 1% or about 700 votes. Reform very much nipping at their heels there. Greater Lincolnshire, this one was a Reform win and quite a decent margin ahead of the competition there. About 40,000 votes or about 16% ahead of the Conservatives. We have North Tyneside, Karen Clark. We went over that one last night. Very, very slim ahead of Reform, and alas, no outdoor pool for me. And West of England here, we have Helen Godwin ahead of Reform, and also the Greens fairly close in contention behind them. Not an awful lot of votes in it there, but they held that one. So probably as far as Labour's concerned, Labour are going to have an awful lot of reasons not to feel good about what's happened. I think they really would have liked to have held that Runcorn in the by-election. That would have helped them with their narrative weaving in the wake of these elections. But the fact that by a hair they've just about managed to hold on to some of these mayoralties, it means that it's not the biggest disaster that it could have been.
But it's still not good for them.
No, it's not good for them. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in any way trying to spin this as a good time for Labour or a not so bad time for Labour or anything. I'm just saying, as far as Labour's concerned, they will probably say, "Oh well, at least we got some of these mayoralties. It wasn't
in some ways. I think they're probably glad that AV was
Sweep away
replaced in
from
some
us.
way. And of course, for all we know, AV some of these
Oh,
seats.
if the AV system for mayoralties had been kept, all of these would have gone to reform. So there's zero chance of Labour taking any kind of electoral reform seriously when it's becoming increasingly clear, and ironically, considering conversations we were having about this a decade ago, first past the post is the only thing that's really stopping Labour from total meltdown at the moment. In terms of the mayoralty results themselves, I don't think Labour have anything to be proud of in Tyneside and Doncaster. Those are areas where they should be winning easily, and the fact that they're only winning by a wafer-thin margin is embarrassing. The only one where I think that Labour has anything to celebrate in is West of England. Um, that is a genuine surprise. I thought that would have gone to the Greens, but the Greens actually did terribly there. They lost vote share, which is remarkable considering that the Greens picked up an extra seat in Bristol. So the Greens doing that badly in West of England is a really bad result for them and probably doesn't bode well for them overall when it comes to these council elections. Reform did significantly better than expected in West of England, especially given that the candidate was Aaron Banks, of all people.
I hadn't realised the Greens had lost vote share there. I looked at that and saw the Greens on 20% and thought, oh yeah, that's pretty good for the Greens. You know, considering where they are nationally behind the other parties.
You think it's
they're doing well in that
possible?
area.
You think it's possible that some Green or some potential Green voters just thought Reform would have been a better chance of getting rid of Labour, or they went to Labour just because they were afraid that Reform might overtake, let's see, Labour?
I think that what probably ended up happening in this one is that because of who the candidate was, Aaron Banks, and all the controversy that had been surrounding this seat as a result of him being the candidate, I suspect that a lot of Green and Lib Dem voters held their nose and voted Labour to stop Aaron Banks from winning. I think if it had been a generic Reform candidate who had been from the local area without any controversy, Reform probably would have ended up winning West of England in the end.
Okay.
But Aaron Banks, being the candidate, ultimately screwed Reform over there. I don't know what they were thinking, picking him of all people to run in that area.
So why is Aaron Banks such a controversial candidate, out of curiosity?
Because he is the man who played a very large role in why Brexit ended up happening. He was like one of the dark money people behind it all happening and gave a lot of support politically and financially to the Brexit cause. And he's just your typical hardcore right-wing populist as well. That's why he's so controversial in that area of the world.
Okay.
On this matter of tactical voting, we had a comment on yesterday's stream from Lee Hallam earlier this morning, which I want to read out, and then I'll give my thoughts on both what you've just said and what he said. So this was partly in response to Runcorn. Obviously, Runcorn is a huge result for Reform, though getting near would have proved their threat to Labour as much in theory. Those 6 extra votes make a difference in impact. Labour are putting out the Tory collapse as a stop Reform tactical vote, as discussed on the stream by some left-wing journalists before. I think it's bunkum. There is no evidence in the other results of even left-wing voters coalescing to stop Reform, so why would Tory voters be doing it in any significant numbers? I suspect it is the opposite. Tory voters voting tactically to give Labour a bloody nose. I don't think Reform could have won the seat without that. Obviously, he's talking about tactical voting in the Runcorn result specifically, and given that we're speaking of different areas of the country, different contests, I think it's reasonable that we can say that a degree of tactical voting may occur, but it can be in different directions for different purposes, depending on the contest. Lincolnshire and Staffordshire, who each have declared half of their seats as a Tory disaster, losing swathes of seats to Reform and a landslide in the mayoralty. Northumberland is a bit different. They're Labour disproportionately worse than the Tories. That might be a sign for today where Labour have a stake in things. They don't in the declared results in the other 2. It might be even worse for them. Labour have clung on to the 3 mayors they held just so that is something for them. And yet southern areas declared yet. And yes, we are. I'm very interested to see how the Lib Dems and the Greens fare in this, but it is totally the case that all of the areas that we're expecting them to do this
Election maps in the comment.
the
The election maps in the comment section has actually commented on some southern areas that have been declaring. Devon is one of them, and it's Tory desolation in Devon. They're losing more or less every single seat to the Lib Dems and Reform in Devon.
Yeah, I just want to just bring up. I've heard at least from TLDR that let's see, the more of the locals today will actually probably see some of the actual Lib Dem gains, just kind of like how back with like the 2018 locals, you didn't see any Labour gains until like the following later day, because you had like a few losses at first before like the London ones came in. So we should be getting more Lib Dems, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Labour here, and we've talked a lot about their terrible performance because it is terrible. They're going to have a net loss of seats by the end of this. Just how big it is questionable, and that shouldn't be happening for a government that just won a massive majority 1 year into their term. So it is worth talking about that. But one of the things I don't think we've talked about a lot here is the performance of the Tories. I mean,
you've preempted me, Tom, by the way, because this was literally the next segue I was going to bring us into. Off the back of what was being said in the group chat, Ben had pointed out that when he was watching the stream yesterday, Kemi Badenoch was hardly mentioned, and I'd thought the same thing after the stream. I realised, isn't it strange that like I barely mentioned sort of Kemi and the Tories relative to some of the other parties, and it wasn't a deliberate thing on my part against Kemi Badenoch, but I think it just goes to show how kind of irrelevant she feels in the current political landscape at the moment. What would you like to say on the Tories?
Essentially, they're just being completely wiped out everywhere they stand, with the exception of a small handful of seats. Whenever a Tory candidate is up for election in these locals, they lose by huge amounts. I mean, the Tories
Tom, you're getting a bit quiet.
Yeah, could you move?
The Tories
move
are doing
yeah.
so terribly right now that they're actually losing a couple of seats to the Labour Party. That's how badly they're doing at the moment. And in Staffordshire, they were obliterated. In Devon, it looks like the same thing is happening there as well. Speaking of Staffordshire Council, it's also been confirmed that that's been gained by Reform. So Staffordshire Council is a Reform gain from Conservatives overall. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Devon. I think that with Devon, you could see Tories just completely wiped out there, like you saw in Staffordshire. And this will be something that will be repeated throughout most of the afternoon. I feel. You'll have you'll have southern areas that will see the Tory vote be completely wiped out by Reform and the Liberal Democrats, with a small handful of Labour gains, but very few and far between for them.
I'd like to read a few comments, and then I'd like to ask Mr. Fielding if he's got anything to say, because I've noticed that he's not spoken in a little while, and I know that as the streams get a little bit more crowded, it is tricky.
Fair enough. Afterwards, can I have something to say on the
absolutely. Right, so let me just do a few of these comments we've got here. Maoist struggle session orchestrator, wonderful username there. Tactical voting to keep Aaron Banks out in Bristol. You have no idea how bad things are. Frank says Cambridgeshire mayoralty expected soon. Conservative candidate Bristow leading in every council area so far. Edward says the 0 seats campaign continues, and Podge says bring back Boris. Bittersweet says, how is the Labour strategy of winning over Reform voters by pissing off all of their own voters strategy going? Should we get out our Labour bingo card from last night? What would the Labour response to that be? Well, we have a mountain to climb, and it's midterm blues, and we need to get our message out there, and it was always going to be difficult. Blah, 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 blah.
Their excuse so far has basically been to pull the old the last Tory government of 14 years card, similar to what the Tories did when they were in government, where they were like, the last Labour government destroyed the world. Like, they're doing the same thing, but with the Tories now. So their strategy's not going well. Also, by the way, James is away because his washing machine is making a lot of noise.
So do you want me to go first then, Swiss?
Yes, absolutely. Let me do one more comment and then I'll jump to you. So Edward also here says, Kemi Badnock is like a terminally online, slightly right-wing Tory girl who watches exclusively rage-bait slop content put in charge of the Tory party. Couldn't have asked for a better end for the cons. Mr. Cooper.
Well, interestingly, with some like the stuff with the Tories, one thing that I was watching like TLDR's video on the locals of today is the Lincoln mayor election. My understanding, the Tory candidate, I mean the Reform candidate, was once a part of the Tory party, right?
Yes, that's right. She was a minister, I believe.
In a sense, this could be a problem for the Tories because you've seen like a Tory to Reform defector not only defecting to the party, but being rewarded by getting electoral victory. This might, as they TLDR might predict, might have some Tories that are thinking of defecting Reform, thinking there could be now benefits from moving from the Conservative Party to Reform. So it might be possible we might get a few MP defections in Parliament if they think, oh, they'll get more from Reform than the Tories or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, you had Lee Anderson defecting, obviously last year. You've had Andrea Jenkin defecting and winning the mayoralty. So yes, I think it is solidifying the idea for possible ship jumpers in the Tory ranks that if you do move over to Reform, you do have a fair prospect of remaining or getting yourself re-elected as a politician. So that element of risk seems to be removed, but they better get if they are going to jump, they better get a move on, because if Reform's momentum continues, Farage may eventually go, as much of a coup as it is for us to win over some Tory MPs, actually we don't need as many of you as we had before. We're doing okay on our own.
That is true. I guess there is also the possibility that Farage thinks, okay, too many association with these Tory defectors might just make people think, oh, there's not really much difference between Reform and the Tories if it's the same people in charge have just screwed us over for the last 14 years or something.
I'll tell you what would be a real coup for Reform at this point, if they had a Labour MP jump ship over to them. That would be very substantial if that happened.
Yeah, I don't really know any Labour MP that would be willing to defect to Reform at the very least. I mean, I could see maybe one defecting to a Tory if the Tories were doing well, but I'm not sure if, let's see, any of the MPs currently elected are Reform light in any way that they're like let's see.
What I would say is Labour's got such a large number of MPs, and so many of them are new MPs that I'm not even aware of, that I couldn't say with any certainty that there are not any MPs within the ranks that would be willing to do so. I can't say one way or the other.
The only one I can think of might be the Labour MP for Hemel Hempstead, because he's one of these guys that goes on Parliament and still moans about Jeremy Corbyn in the Parliament. So if any one of them does it, it'll probably be somebody like him. But no, it's difficult to imagine anybody in Labour who could defect from Labour to Reform. I don't know who that would be.
A couple, pardon me, a couple comments here, just kind of historically. Podge mentions that Lee Anderson used to be Labour. Yes, Lee Anderson went from Labour to Tory to Reform. And Blue Guy says that Simon Danskuk was a Labour MP who stood for Reform in Rochdale. So it has been known to happen, even though, of course, Tory to Reform is the more natural pipeline. I'll do a couple more very quickly here, and then I'll jump to you. Edward says Reform do need the defectors because they really struggle on candidate quality, which, given how disastrously unqualified and useless most MPs are, is saying something. Election Maps UK says Darren Grimes has been elected, could be the next leader of County Durham Council.
But
County Durham lad got elected, which really shows that we live in a cursed world.
But anyway, in terms of Labour defections, do you think there are more likely to be some defections to the Lib Dems or the Greens down the line, or you think none of them would do that?
Very.
I
I think it would really depend. There's a possibility it could happen if Labour continues to double down on the social conservatism, like the anti-trans stuff and the anti-migrant stuff. If they double down on that, I could eventually see there being some really liberal Labour MP who just has enough of this and quits and defects to the Lib Dems. But I think we've still got quite a ways to go. The thing
think
about the current Labour Party at the moment is because so many of them are just Starmer yes men, it's really difficult to imagine who would leave that party who isn't an MP that was there before 2024.
I'd like to just add quickly that what you said there about the perception amongst sort of left wing voters, perhaps within the Greens or the Lib Dems, that or voters that people that may want to move over to those parties, saying that Labour's perceived now as being anti-trans or anti-migrant. It's also interesting, though, that if you were to look at the view of the Labour Party amongst, say, reform circles or those on the right, they would still very much say that Starmer has no idea what he thinks about the trans issue and moves with the wind, that Labour are overseeing massive amounts of boat crossings and all the rest of it, that as much as in terms of positioning and rhetorically Labour may be pissing off the left flank by being seen to be going too socially conservative, as far as the social conservatives are concerned, they still think that Labour's totally wishy-washy and isn't doing anything for them. So Labour's not making any friends at the moment.
Well, in
Well,
many
this is why
ways,
Labour is doing so badly in the council elections, because they're having a similar problem to the Tories right now, where they're losing votes from all angles. It's just not as severe as what the Tories are enduring at the moment.
if anything, it kind of shows that some of their attempts to strategize of winning reform voters isn't working, and instead they're just losing voters that would normally have to like the Greens and the Lib Dems.
Although the one thing I'll say to that, and I'm not even certain if I believe this as an argument, but just for the sake of a bit of devil's advocacy, could it be the case that if they hadn't been trying to make the overtures towards reform voters that they have done in the past few months, that actually they could have lost even worse than they have been in some areas? That's a thing that we just can't measure, but it is possible.
I don't think it will, because the problem with a lot of centrist parties is they really overestimate how many right-wing people vote for them. In the US and UK, what I often find is that far more left-wing and liberal people are willing to vote for centrist parties, but are also willing to turn against centrist parties than right-wing people are. It's almost become a meme at this point that centrists will constantly chase after a right-wing voter base that almost will never go for them. Kamala Harris tried to do it in the US when she got people like Dick Cheney and the Cheneys in general on to essentially warmonger against Iran in order to try and get Republican votes. It didn't work. Labour tried it in the general election and it didn't work there either, and it's just not going to work with reform. And the reason why it never works is because what this tactic often does is it legitimizes the arguments and the points and the policies of the right wing, and then eventually right wingers go, oh, our policies have become legitimized. Why on earth would we vote for you when we can get the full authentic version by voting for a right wing political party?
What I'd like to do is read a few more comments that we have here as well. Lee Hallam says next year is the crunch for Labour. Definitely, with the we've got the Scottish and Welsh elections, then haven't we?
Yeah, I think
In addition to
to
others.
add a little bit more on Tom's point, the few centre left or centre left parties that have done well are those that are going up opposition in some of these populist right wing rhetoric, as we've seen with Canada this week and possibly Australia, I think this week or something. So.
That's yeah. No, there's a case to be made to say that Labour. I mean, certainly Labour would be shoring up their left flank if they actually started moving counter to the right wing populists. But as we've said, it's a tricky thing because they do lose support from both sides. Edward in the chat says Labour are pissing off their Metro Lib base with rhetoric and not delivering on the rhetoric for Middle England in regards to legal or illegal immigration. Same story with the Tories, all rhetoric. Blue Guy says, funny how Labour never shift left when the Greens do well or independent left candidates. Podge says Labour has the same problem Democrats in the US had, pissing off their base to try to win more moderates right who are never going to vote for them, along the lines of what Tom had said there. A lot more Green voters want to vote Labour than Reform voters, said Blue Guy. Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I think that anecdotally, but a number of members of my family voted Green in these elections just gone, and I think a lot of them would like Labour to be a party they'd want to vote for. I don't think they're opposed to Labour on any kind of specific grounds against the Labour Party. It's just that they don't view the Labour Party as being as left wing as they would have liked. I think all of them were probably Labour voters during the Corbyn era. Edward says, hang on, Dick Cheney et al. Are ridiculously unpopular people with all sides. No one likes them. Podge says UKIP had 7 seats to their height in Wales. I can see Reform doing better. Yes, absolutely. And Edward adds, except Tony Blair did triangulation perfectly and Starmer did the same flank from the right triangulation to win in 2024. But remember what Tony Blair says, you have to deliver also. And
But
certainly
Starmer
since
got
Labour's been in
half a
power,
million.
there's been a real lack of delivering.
But Starmer got 500,000 less votes than Corbyn did in 2024. Starmer only won because the Tory vote completely collapsed, and Reform took a load of votes away from the Tories in key areas they needed to win. There wasn't any successful triangulation there. It was simply Farage showing up, standing, taking loads of votes away from the Tories, and then loads of other Tory voters just not turning up to vote. Turnout completely collapsed in 2024 to the lowest it had been since 2001. So I don't really buy that argument that the triangulation worked in 2024.
And
And
also, Blair had, at least when he was running, some decent policies that people actually were somewhat enthusiastic to vote for, like the minimum wage, if you will. So,
well, yeah, that's the other thing as well. Blair had triangulation work because he actually had left-wing and right-wing policies that the public supported and were popular. He managed to keep the left wing of the Labour Party voting for him all the way up until 2005 because he had policies that left-wing people liked, such as the minimum wage. Starmer had no such policies.
I mean,
If anything-
here we are
if
now
anything-
with them fighting tooth and nail over whether or not they're going to keep net zero, which seems to be one of the last remaining bastions of any kind of a seemingly left-wing policy at this point.
Yeah,
I just want to say on the triangulation quickly, I'll make 2 points, kind of one in favour and one against. What I will say for Starmer's Labour is the fact that they put on, if not votes, then certainly percentage in the areas they needed to in order to beat the Tories, and they lost out support in what had previously been some of their stronger areas. So in terms of that balancing act of who they're trying to appeal to, they specifically did it in the right places in order to win such a large majority as they did. But you're absolutely right that the Tory decline was a very big factor there. But also, I'll mention that as far as the Corbyn element goes, you're absolutely right in saying that they won less votes than under the Corbyn era. But also, there was an element, I think, of an anti-Corbyn vote that coalesced around the Tories during the time that Corbyn was in power. So as much as Labour were getting more votes under Corbyn, which is absolutely correct to say, Corbyn was a push and a pull figure. And there were also people who were more likely to vote to try and block Corbyn, which if Corbyn had still been leader, perhaps the Tories wouldn't have done quite as badly as they did in 2024, because there would have still been some element of that going on as well.
Oh no, I'm not saying this is an argument in favour of bringing back Corbyn or Corbynism or anything of that nature.
No, just extra context. That's all. I wasn't disagreeing with what you were saying. I was just
It's just saying that despite Labour's huge victory, in some ways they're more vulnerable than when they were in the Corbyn years.
It's a shallow landslide. That's the problem with it at the end of the day. It's not like what Blair got in 1997, where he got 44% of the vote and had massive majorities in all of the seats that he won, apart from a handful. The seats that Labour has is that half of them are marginals when you look at the breakdown of them. That wasn't the case for Blair's majority. it was huge and it was solid and it was built on an incredibly strong foundation, which is why Blair was able to push through a lot of unpopular policies at the time and deal with a lot of political backlash from different wings of the public.
Yeah, and
That's
also
not
able
the
to
case for Starmer.
serve a second full-on term, which no Labour Prime Minister before was able to do so.
Well, not only that, but he was able to do it with basically no change in the electoral map.
Yeah, it was
Like, I think Labour lost 5 seats back then, which is
yeah,
utterly remarkable, to
yeah.
be
In many
honest.
ways, 2001 was like the biggest Bitsy national by-election or local election, if you will, in UK history.
That's what it was called at the time, yeah. They called the quiet landslide because nothing changed apart from a handful of seats, most
What
of
I'd
which were
like
in
to
Northern Ireland.
What I'd like to do, guys, I'd like to ask you both a question, and then when we reach about the hour mark or so, I'll probably look to wrap up for now, take a break for an hour or two, and then come back for our final leg of the coverage a bit later in the afternoon. So, what I want to ask you both, and indeed viewers in the chat, if you have any views on this, will Labour change tack at all in the wake of these results, and if so, in what way?
They will. You go first, John.
I think at best you're going to get a cabinet reshuffle. The only question is Ed Miliband going to still be on there or not? Because he seems to be the most likely to go. But if he goes, that'll be more of a sign that Labour's shifting more rightwards, just doubling down on more of the right things, blaming the left, even though they've gone as right and left as you could go on. I mean, basically, like I was trying to say a bit earlier, like if anything, during the Starmer years in opposition, they were just basically anti-left thing. So that was also why none of the left would went and vote for them in 2024, with a few exceptions, if you will, particularly like the local MP, I guess. But yeah, I think they're more likely, unfortunately, to learn all the wrong lessons, move right, and probably alienate further their voter base for like parties like the Greens and the Lib Dems. And I guess for Wales, some of the more left-wing ones might more go to Plaid Cymru if they don't go to Reform. So who knows? And maybe even SNP in Scotland. But I think the Scottish voter base is dead set. The only change you can see is maybe Reform rising. But yeah, that's basically.
I'm more or less of the same school of thought. I think that Labour will change, but they will change in the worst way possible. I think that they will, in typical Labour fashion, take away all the wrong lessons from this result. They will go further right. They will probably get rid of Ed Miliband, Lisa Nandy, and probably Bridget Phillipson from the Shadow Cabinet and replace them with people who are more to the right wing of them. And I think that what Labour's next obsession is going to be, in order to try and win over reform voters, is anti-net zero policy. And my belief in that is backed by the fact that the Tony Blair Institute, the day before these locals happened, as we mentioned last night, came out with an anti-net zero talking point. And when it comes to Labour governance, whatever that man says, they go with usually a couple months later. So I think that what we're probably going to see in the coming weeks and months is Labour going more to the right and becoming an anti-net zero party in order to try and win over reform voters, which will go about as well as you expect it to, and Labour will just continue to bleed support from all sides.
I wouldn't be surprised if the Greens went up by 3 or 5 points when Labour does that.
Can I ask, because so far we've been speaking in terms of sort of like, do they move left, do they move right, etc. What about the fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves is existing within? Do we think that there's any scope that they may go right? The key thing, whether it's left or right, whatever policy direction we choose, is the need to be seen to be delivering, the need to be doing things and doing them now. Is there a chance that we see a loosening of those rules finally, and they start spending a little bit more, or taxing in different places, or changing up their economic strategy?
I don't think so unless we have a recession. The only way I see them changing their fiscal rules is if they have if a recession happens, because they seem so incredibly dogmatically committed to those fiscal rules at the expense of all else, even when it's to the detriment of their government and their popularity and everything. And the thing about it is, at the end of the day, is that these fiscal rules are ironically doing more economic damage to the UK than if they didn't exist in the first place. Because what keeps happening is Reeves keeps borrowing record amounts of money in order to fund day-to-day spending, because, and that's bad because she's borrowing money whilst we have high interest rates, which means that in the long term, more and more of our spending will be going to paying off our debt instead of towards public services and welfare and other things of that nature. So she's doing far more economic damage to the UK than if she had kept, not had those fiscal rules in the first place.
I wouldn't be.
But they are so dogmatically committed to them because of the promise that they made in the election, and also because they just want to keep doing this, bringing up the ghost of Liz Truss in order to use as a talking point against the Tories and how bad they were in government.
It's funny you mentioned Liz Truss, because we've just had Liz Truss evoked in the chat as well. I want to read a comment here from Edward, who's been offering. I don't think I've had you in the chat before, Edward, but you're offering some good insights today, so it's appreciated. Reeves has little room. There is no economic growth. We rely on massive capital inflows to pay for our massive trade deficit, so we can't do anything to upset the markets, or it falls down now, like with Liz Truss. So because what you mentioned there about Labour's promises in the election, they allowed themselves to be boxed into a corner on tax by the laundry list of all the things that they definitely weren't going to raise, and like you've said, now the issue is that in their capacity of how do we manage the finances, it's they're borrowing for day to day. Well, no, they're supposed to not be borrowing for day to day, wasn't it? Wasn't their whole shtick that they wouldn't borrow for day to day, but they would borrow for investments?
But that's what. But that's not what's
What's
happening. They are borrowing because what keeps happening is that the budget surplus that she wants is never being met because the spending requirements of the British state just keep going up and up and up each time, and so she has to borrow in order to keep things being the status quo. Otherwise, the markets will find out that there is a gap between the government's spending promises and what's actually being spent, which will cause chaos. But the thing with this market reaction that Reeves keeps doing is that this would have been a valid point to make about a month ago from now. But after what Trump did with Liberation Day and the tariffs, I really don't buy it anymore. The whole global economy has been thrown into total turmoil by that decision. And so Reeves should really make the argument of the global circumstances have changed for the extreme negative, and we can't carry on doing what we're doing now because otherwise we'll head to a point of fiscal insolvency.
I mean, what
So
she's
we
doing at the
need to
moment.
change.
I mean, this sort of tinkering every time that they want to try and keep within the positive side of the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast, and they're having to go, all right, we'll raise a few more little billion from this or a few more from that, and then the next time they get their projection, surprise, surprise, global economic outlook is even worse. They're going to have to do more because there's yet again no more headroom. It's just not a good situation for them. I want to read a comment by Joe because I think this one's interesting. Average Joe says, I think Labour will further water down their net zero, but wrap it in economic nationalism and talk about bringing back manufacturing, steel, and nationalisation. Sorry, bring manufacturing back. Also, steel nationalisation was one of the few popular recent policies. I could see scope for that. I could certainly see scope for that because even reform are going on that kind of, that's kind of where the traditional left and the populist right seem to intersect somewhat, isn't it? On this economic, slightly economic nationalist, or at least backing domestic manufacturing and that kind of a thing. So that could be the avenue where Labour tries to, if we're talking about what, if any, measures could wed together left wing, right wing voters, etc., that could possibly be the area where they have a little bit of success.
could be the case, but the problem is even that they're lackluster on, because what Labour's doing with steel nationalisation is, according to Jonathan Reynolds anyway, they're not keeping the steel company permanently under control of the British state. They're simply holding on to it until they can find another buyer for it later on down the line. And that's just an incredibly stupid thing to do, because steel in the UK is just never going to be globally profitable because of cheap steel made in places like China. So what's going to happen is, if Labour do find a buyer, the same thing will happen again later on down the line. It will make a massive net loss in profit. The company won't want to keep it anymore and will want to either close it, and Labour will either need to let it close, like they did with the steel plant in Port Talbot, or they take it over again and we're back to square one.
Honestly, I think Thatcher has literally killed the mentality of nationalisation is good with our politicians.
Well, I think that was the case. That was certainly sort of the precedent that she set, that continued on for some time away from nationalised industry towards privatisation. But I wonder if, even with what you've said, Tom, that Labour's kind of, it's a half-hearted thing. I wonder if that argument is gradually beginning to shift, because you do see a lot of public sentiment in favour of nationalisation these days.
Oh, the public sentiment has always been for nationalisation of these industries for years, if not decades. The problem, as always, is the political class is completely unwilling to move with the public opinion on this. And Labour is no exception to this when it comes to nationalisation. I really honestly don't get it, to be brutally honest with you, because steel nationalisation is an incredibly easy win for them, but they're so addicted to seemingly market fundamentalism that they won't do it, no matter what, even when it makes sense to do it.
Yeah. If only Labour could take the low-hanging fruit of the things that appear so obvious to us, to just say, "Look, Labour, come on, give them a little smack in the face. Look at your results. Look how you could change."
I do also think there's still a bit of this anti-Corbyn mentality of, like, since he was so pro-nationalisation, like, nationalisation bad with some of them.
Mate, I mean, I don't know. Partly, I'm still recovering from last night, so I'm trying to get all my thoughts in order. But I think certainly they are dogmatically attached to not wanting to do all of the overtly left-wing things at the moment. That still seems to be the trajectory that they're on. What I'd like to do, guys, because as I said, we're going to wrap up shortly, take a break for an hour or two, and then come back for the final leg. I want to do a recap of the headline numbers of councillors here before we go. So as things currently stand, Reform are on 170. That's up 170. The Conservatives 67, down 140. Significant losses for the Tories there. Liberal Democrats on 42, up 23, looking quite healthy for them so far. Labour on 20, down 43, not a good time for them. Independents on 15, down 15, and the Greens on 9, up 5. So Lib Dems and the Greens thus far, about a doubling of where they are so far. Labour and the Conservatives obviously down by quite a lot.
The only one that kind of surprises me is that the Independents have lost a few.
I generally expect independents to increase in these local elections these days. That seems to be the trend. But I mean, by the time all is said and done at the end of this today, the independents could well be up. It's still early days there. Right then, guys, thank you very much for joining me for this sort of recap, basically, of the by-election and where we've been so far. I'll be back again a bit later on, and I think Dan Hill, Apollo TD, will be joining us later as well.
No problem.
And we shall see where things end up. So until then, catch you all later, guys.
Yeah, no problem. See you later, Swiss.
See you later.